Interviews with rock stars can turn explosive when a reporter pushes too far. Whether mocking appearances, digging into personal lives, or stirring up drama, some questions cross the line. From Gene Simmons' partner storming off to Johnny Rotten cursing out a smug host, these moments prove even legends have limits. What happens when a musician refuses to stay silent? Gene Simmons and the marriage meltdown. Gene Simmons has never been one to shy away from controversy. As the legendary bassist of Kiss, he has built a reputation for his bold personality and unapologetic confidence. But even the most seasoned rock stars have their limits. During a television interview with his longtime partner, Shannon Tweed, things were uncomfortable when the host decided to bring up Simmons' infamous history with women. Simmons had always been open about his rock star lifestyle, often boasting about his past encounters. But this time, the setting was different. Shannon Tweed, his partner of nearly 3 decades, was sitting right beside him. When the interviewer asked how many women he had been with, the air in the room changed instantly. Tweed's expression darkened, and she shifted in her unsettled seat. At first, she tried to keep her composure, but the tension in the room was undeniable. Simmons, being the showman that he is, attempted to brush it off with humor. He cracked a few jokes, trying to lighten the mood, but it quickly became clear that Tweed was not in the mood for laughs. The more he tried to downplay it, the angrier she became. Her frustration was written all over her face. This wasn't just an awkward moment, it was a relationship on display, unraveling in front of the cameras. The breaking point came when Tweed could no longer tolerate the conversation. With a mix of anger and disappointment, she stood up and walked off the set. The interviewer, rather than acknowledging his role in the tension, tried to put the blame back on Simmons. It was an attempt to dodge responsibility, but anyone watching could see what had happened. Simmons, despite his usual bravado, looked genuinely uncomfortable. He remained seated, likely realizing that no amount of charm or wit could salvage the situation. Paul Stanley claps, back at an age joke. Kiss has always been a band that commands attention, whether it's with their explosive performances, their elaborate costumes, or their unapologetic attitude. Over the years, they've faced plenty of criticism, but few moments stand out quite like the time Paul Stanley effortlessly shut down an ageist comment during a press conference. It was one of those moments where a rock star reminded the world that confidence and quick wit can turn an insult into a victory. The setting was a Kiss press conference, where the band was promoting one of their tours. As usual, the room was filled with reporters eager to ask questions, some respectful and some looking to stir the pot. One particular interviewer decided to take a different approach, throwing in a not-so-subtle jab at the band's age. The question wasn't just about touring. It carried an implication. Was Kiss too old to still be on stage? Should they just retire? It was a classic case of a reporter underestimating their subject, and Paul Stanley was having none of it. Without missing a beat, Stanley fired back with a response that left the room roaring. He didn't just answer the question, he flipped it on its head. Instead of getting defensive, he pointed out the obvious jealousy in the reporter's tone. With a smirk, he sarcastically suggested that maybe the interviewer could use some makeup too. It might make them look more refreshed. The comment was brilliant, not just because of what he said, but because of how he said it. It was dripping with confidence, humor, and the kind of charisma that only a seasoned rock star could pull off. Ronnie James Dio loses his temper over a height joke. Ronnie James Dio may have been one of the greatest voices in heavy metal, but he was not someone to mess with. Throughout his career, he was known for his powerful stage presence, legendary vocals, and unshakable confidence. He carried himself like a giant in the music industry, so when an interviewer decided to make a joke about his height, it didn't sit well with him. This was one of those moments where Dio's patience ran thin, and he made sure everyone in the room knew it. During a one-on-one interview, the interviewer casually mentioned that Dio was pretty short. It was a comment that could have easily been brushed off, but the way it was delivered felt more like an insult than an observation. Dio, never one to take disrespect lightly, responded with sarcasm, saying he was 7 feet tall. The response was classic Dio, sharp, witty, and dismissive. But the interviewer didn't stop there. Instead of moving on, he repeated the remark, almost as if he was trying to provoke a reaction. Dio's expression changed in an instant. The humor drained from his face, replaced by visible irritation. He wasn't in the mood to play along anymore. The more the interviewer pushed, the angrier he became. His tone shifted from sarcastic to clear that the conversation was heading in the wrong direction. He warned the interviewer not to piss him off, making it clear that this was no longer just an awkward moment. It was a real problem. The breaking point came when Dio had finally had enough. He didn't just threaten to walk out, he offered to clear the room and settle things right then and there. It was a rare glimpse of raw anger from someone who was usually composed, but when he felt disrespected, he didn't hold back. The interviewer, realizing he had crossed a line, quickly backed down, but the damage was already done. Sebastian Bach walks out over a Poison comparison. Sebastian Bach has never been one to hold his tongue, and when an interviewer compared his band, Skid Row, to Poison, it was only a matter of time before things went south. The former Skid Row frontman had spent years carving out his identity as a hard rock and heavy metal icon, and he wasn't about to let anyone lump his music in with a band he didn't respect. What started as a simple interview about his music career quickly turned into a moment that fans still talk about today. The interviewer casually asked whether Skid Row's sound was similar to Poison's, suggesting that both bands had the same fan base. It was a comparison that many rock fans had made before, but it was also one that Bach never appreciated. At first, he tried to keep his cool. He laughed awkwardly, probably hoping the topic would change. But instead of dropping it, the interviewer kept pushing. He insisted that the two bands were part of the same scene and had a lot in common. Bach's patience started to wear thin. His expression changed, and the laughter faded. He firmly denied the comparison, making it clear that he did not see Skid Row and Poison as equals. The more the interviewer pressed, the more frustrated he became. There was no hiding his irritation. He was done being polite. Nikki Sixx ends an interview over a Mötley Crüe versus Poison feud. Nikki Sixx has never been one to sugarcoat his opinions, and when it comes to his feelings about Poison, he has made them very clear. The feud between Mötley Crüe and Poison has been simmering for decades, with both bands rising to fame in the 80s glam metal scene. While fans often compare the two, Sixx has never had any interest in entertaining the idea that they were equals. During a local TV interview, an interviewer decided to test Sixx's patience by bringing up the rivalry, and the result was nothing short of explosive. The interview was supposed to be a standard segment about Mötley Crüe's music and upcoming projects, but things quickly took a turn when the interviewer decided to stir the pot. With a smirk, he asked Sixx, "Who rocked harder in the 80s, Mötley Crüe or Poison?" Anyone familiar with the history between the two bands knew that this was a loaded question. Sixx had spent years dismissing Poison as a lightweight act compared to Mötley Crüe, and bringing up the rivalry was bound to provoke a reaction. At first, Sixx didn't respond. He just sat there, glaring at the interviewer with a look that said everything. His body language shifted, his expression darkened, and the atmosphere in the room grew tense. He was annoyed but was trying to keep his composure. For a moment, it seemed like he might let it slide. But the interviewer didn't stop there. Instead of moving on, he pressed further, making it clear that he wanted a reaction. Chris Martin's furious response to a personal question. Chris Martin is usually known for his calm demeanor and friendly personality, but even he has limits. As the frontman of Coldplay, he has spent years dealing with the press, but nothing could have prepared him for the sheer insensitivity of a paparazzo who ambushed him at an airport. Martin had just arrived at the airport, looking exhausted from travel. He was minding his own business when a paparazzo approached him with a camera in hand. At first, it seemed like just another annoying encounter with the press, but then the photographer opened his mouth. With an overly cheerful tone, he congratulated Martin on becoming a father. The problem was that the comment came shortly after Martin's then-wife, Gwyneth Paltrow, had suffered a miscarriage. The question wasn't just inappropriate, it was cruel. Martin's reaction was immediate. His face twisted in anger, and without hesitation, he fired back. "Get the fuck out of here," he snapped, his voice filled with frustration. The sheer audacity of the question had caught him off guard, and he wasn't going to let it slide. But the paparazzo didn't back down. He kept pushing, refusing to walk away, even as Martin's temper flared. The Sex Pistols' live TV disaster. The Sex Pistols were never a band known for playing by the rules. From the moment they exploded onto the scene, they were loud, chaotic, and completely unapologetic. But nothing captured their rebellious spirit quite like their infamous 1976 interview on Today with host Bill Grundy. It was supposed to be just another TV appearance, but instead, it turned into one of the most scandalous moments in British television history. The band wasn't even supposed to be there that night. Queen had originally been scheduled for the interview, but when Freddie Mercury fell ill, the Sex Pistols were brought in as last-minute replacements. That alone was already setting the stage for something unpredictable. To make things even more volatile, both the band and Grundy had reportedly been drinking before the cameras started rolling. Grundy, a veteran broadcaster, probably thought he could handle the punk rockers with a bit of sarcasm. He was wrong. As the interview began, Grundy took a condescending tone, making snide remarks about the band's recent record deal. Instead of treating them seriously, he mocked their success, implying they were sellouts. It was the kind of provocation that could have gone unnoticed, but the Sex Pistols weren't the kind to ignore insults. Johnny Rotten, the band's infamous frontman, muttered a curse word under his breath which didn't go unnoticed by the audience. Grundy, perhaps not realizing he was live on television, encouraged them to misbehave, challenging them to say something outrageous. That was all the invitation they needed. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.